Thank you for tuning into the back page. It's episode 4, September the 19th. I'm your host, Colin Crisp.
And I'm Carter Sims, and today we'll be going through recent Hayes athletic results, recap the weekend in college and NFL football, and take a look at the MLB a few weeks out from the playoffs. Recently for Hayes sports, boys soccer lost 1-4 to Kilbourne. Girls soccer took a 3-0 win versus Kilbourne. Girls volleyball lost 3-0 to Marysville on the weekend. Girls tennis won 3-2 versus Hilliard Darby, and football lost to Westerville North 14-7.
In the world of college football, Ohio State has finally found an offense. We have talked week in and week out about our concerns about this Ohio State offense, and while it was a group of 5 team, I think that this gives us a lot of hope going into this Notre Dame game next week.
Yeah, I was watching this game, and there was a play where Kyle McCord kind of took the top off the defense on this deep ball to Marvin Harrison. And I don't know why, but I felt like that just broke a seal on the season. I feel like that's kind of opened the floodgates a little bit, and we saw that dominant Ohio State performance that we, spoiled or not, come to expect early in this part of the season. I don't know, it just kind of felt like a weight off the shoulders of every Ohio State fan. You're like, okay, yes, now we're back.
100%. That second quarter, I'm at work, and I'm watching on my phone propped up on the salad bar, and I just was so happy sitting there watching that thinking, we have our team. Because there was a big part of me that was just convinced we were going to go into this Western Kentucky game, and it was going to be another 35-14, 35-21 win. And going into Notre Dame, I was just going to be convinced we were going to lose. But after seeing that, this team can beat the offensive team early in the season. It's just a matter of if they do it, not can.
Yeah, and I was really impressed with the defense as well. I mean, we had dominant performances by guys like Denzel Burke, and many forced turnovers, especially even towards the end. On the pick six, we had scoop and score in the second half. Basically everything you could ask for from your offense and defense, you were able to get in that game.
It was a very efficient win, and the ball bounced all the right way for the Buckeyes. It was all around a great day for them.
I know Western Kentucky is not the most prestigious opponent, and we're gonna get to Notre Dame, who, whether it's a rivalry or not, call it what you want, but I think that's still going to be a game that you're actually going to kind of see the identity of this Ohio State team. But to have this type of performance going into that is, obviously just a good feeling all around.
And while Western Kentucky isn't they're obviously not Georgia. They're not a bad team. All the group of 5 teams this year, they had the second highest over-under win total prior to the season. So, it's the equivalent of playing a Tulane, and USC lost to them last year. So, a very notable game that happened early on Saturday was number 3 Florida State playing Boston College. Going into the weekend, it wasn't on everybody's radar as Boston College was a 4-touchdown underdog, but it ended up being one of the more entertaining games of the weekend.
Yeah. I think we talked about this earlier on the earlier pod. I forget if it was last week or the week before, but the ACC is kind of just like the Wild West right now. And I know, yes, it's on the East Coast. Don't come from my head, but just in general, it seems like there's kind of a changing in the guard going on in that conference. We don't know who's really going to be the dominant team that's going to, at least win the conference championship, even much less if there's going to be anyone that's in the college football playoff discussion by the time that part of the year rolls around. But Florida State just looked bad in this game.
It was really bad. I would say that if Boston College didn't have 18 penalties, they win that game. I don't think it's a hot take if you sat and watched the whole thing. There were multiple times where Boston College was either approaching putting points on the board or approaching getting a stop, and a penalty just ruined the whole thing. They set a record for school history, most penalties in a game. And being Florida State, looking back on the film of that game, being the number 3, now number 4 team in the country, and being able to think, we didn't win that game, they lost it.
Yeah.
That can't be a very confidence-giving thing going into the Clemson game. They'll have to really recalibrate.
Yeah, and you hit on it a minute ago, going into this Clemson game, I think this is going to be a very crucial point for both teams. We've seen Clemson look rough earlier in the year. Now Florida State had one of the worst performances you can have to win. someone's going to have a get-right game in this big game here, and I just don't know who it's going to be.
And this one game could have enough momentum to shift the ACC the rest of the year. Just looking at it, and besides Florida State and Clemson, there's not a lot of eye-popping teams in the ACC, and it's arguable to say these two aren't very eye-popping currently. If you look around North Carolina, they did really good week 1, but since Appalachian State gave them trouble. And then after that, there's not really a big, just eye-popping team that we've even talked about or has gotten national attention. I mean, the next biggest one I'd say is Miami. So, in that regard, that conference is completely up for the taking, and the biggest early season chance they'll have to get a stranglehold on is at noon Saturday. The Seminoles were the only Florida team to open eyes this week, as the Gators had probably their best performance under the Billy Napier era. I don't know if that's even arguable. That was a really dominant win against what was supposed to be a playoff contending Tennessee, but it was never really close. There was never a point where I thought the Vols were in that game.
Yeah, this is the game where you might have been doing something in the day, and then you turn on the TV, waiting for the night game to start, and you're just taken aback by the result that you're seeing on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
But credits to Florida though, had a dominant run game. Still not sure, the SEC already had Bama go down, so way too early to really be predicting who's going to come out of that conference, really any conference, but definitely something, I think, a Florida performance to raise eyebrows.
Oh, 100%. Because we've been looking at the Florida team lately, and after the last head coaching era ended, we were curious how long it would take for them to get back to at least getting winning seasons consistently. Because right now it's not even, it's up in the air if they'll go 6-6. And now, after this Tennessee win, I'm curious to see how high they can fly. Because if Florida can get through the SEC East and have a 9-3, 8-4 season, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge for where they're at. Additionally, if you are an ETN fan, you have a second one coming, it would look like. He had 172 yards on the ground and averaged almost 8 yards per carry. He had just an incredible game, indisputably the player of the game. I don't know where Tennessee goes from this. I feel like either this could be the South Carolina game of last year, but it happened way earlier in the season, so we didn't really ever get a chance to see them bounce back from a big loss like that. So I think it's really up in the air if they can come back and get the East or even be contenders in it after a loss like that.
Yeah.
Colorado just keeps finding a way to grab headlines, as rather it be them upsetting the number 2 team in the country last year in week 1, or the transfer portal shenanigans prior to the season, or just hiring Deion Sanders. I could keep going, but this week may have topped it all.
Yeah, I mean, in no world should you be up at 2 a.m. watching Colorado football, right? That's just not something that makes sense. But, this game, I think the hype going in this game was about as high as you can get for a Colorado State matchup. You had the comments about, taking your hood down and sunglasses off, and so then Colorado responded by handing out sunglasses before the game, and, on the game day set, everybody got the shades and first take throughout the week. I think Colorado was, like they said, always prepare properly for every opponent, but then when they just add extra motivation, that's where it starts to become personal. I think Colorado stayed themselves throughout the entire week, and so this is going to be something that people gravitate towards just because this team is just must-watch TV.
And even before the theatrics of before the game, the actual game itself was so fun. Going into the fourth quarter, had a ranked team on upset watch down by 11, and then they come back to win it in a very Brady-esque 2-minute drill drive, go to overtime, and it's back and forth. Just the theatrics of Shedeur Sanders and his performance.
Yeah.
It was just a marvel to behold.
And the only thing I wish about this game is that there weren't so many, penalties the entire time, but I think Colorado State played a good game too. A lot of the headlines will go to Colorado here, but I think Colorado, hats off to them for the contest that they put up.
I may be I may not be the only person on the planet that feels like this, but I don't think I'm in like the majority. But I really thought Colorado was going to go in there and just pummel them. I expected to get home from work and turn on the TV, and it was going to be 40-7 Colorado. And I was going to go to sleep happy, knowing Dion was 3-0. And I got home and I turned on the TV, and it's a thriller the rest of the way. And I think that alone is an impressive thing out of Colorado State.
Yeah.
I don't think a ton of people thought that was what they were coming home to.
And, it's not going to stop anytime soon, right? I mean, Oregon is on the docket for this weekend. USC's down the road. This team, we're going to start to really see the identity of this Colorado team when it comes to playing big-time opponents pretty soon.
And a big thing for the West Coast is that their conference is arguably the best one right now. They have the most ranked teams. They have the best out-of-conference win percentage. They're doing a lot of things right in the Pac-12, ironically, considering it's one of their last seasons as a conference. But if Colorado can do really, really good in conference, it'll say so much. Because there's just so much talent out there, from Oregon State to Oregon to USC to Utah, UCLA even. There's a ton of great teams out there, and if Colorado can put themselves even into the top 5 of that conference, it'll say so much about Deion's year one.
And we don't want to look down the map too much because I believe Colorado's moving conferences soon.
Yeah, they're going Big 12.
Big 12, so, winning over Oregon isn't going to be something that is going to be the judgment of every future Deion Sanders Colorado season. But having signature wins like this in your first year, that only helps your team in terms of obviously recruiting and ranking going forward. But even just like going back to the actual game from this weekend, still a high octane offensive performance from Colorado. I think your main concern right now has to be the health of Travis Hunter.
Yeah, that's true. That was a really, really brutal hit. I expected there to be uproar about it, and then I ended up getting more than I anticipated. There's been so much coverage on it, but I'm hoping he can come back because he's such a marvel. I can't think of another player that's doing what he's doing right now in college football ever. It's like in the last 20 years of football, I can't think of another one like that. So, it would be really tragic if this generational player had health take him out. So, hopefully he'll be back sooner than later.
Like you said, a player playing both sides of the ball and not really seeing that in the current time. I mean, we've seen guys more in the NFL ranks be able to play both sides of the ball, but not be elite at their unnatural side, right? Like, we've seen J.J. Watt play tight end for the Texans before, but this is just something we haven't seen in current football. And I believe there was a quote a couple weeks ago that Deion had that he's number 1 overall in either position, whether he wants to go as a corner or a receiver. So I think it's going to be interesting, if injury becomes a concern and they start playing some selective teams during the season where maybe they don't want him playing both sides of the ball. What side of the ball do you think they would play him primarily on if they started him at 1?
Well, if he really is number 1 on both sides, I think it comes down to the team they're playing. It's a matchup thing. If they have a bunch of corner weaknesses, then throw them at receiver and use that mismatch advantage. But then, once more, they have a really, really good receiver that they want to lock down. They can have that matchup advantage. So I think it'll be a just by the week basis. Like, for instance, against Oregon, they have really good corners. They may need to put their best receiver out there. So I'm not sure if he'll end up playing or what. But if they were making that decision this week, I would look at it and be like, well, their corners, they're really good. Their receivers, I think our corners got it. Throw them in at receiver.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
So you'd have him kind of be that elite receiver for Colorado this week if you were just going to go on.
Yeah. Because Oregon's defense is so physical, and Travis Hunter's the kind of physical receiver that can take it. I think that he'd be a really good matchup this week against
Speaking
Oregon.
of elite receivers, in the NFL we saw the Vikings go down to the Eagles for their second loss of the year. And obviously it's early, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on this Vikings team because this is a team that I personally was relatively high on going into the year. I think coming off a interesting season last year where they looked great at times and then they kind of flamed out in the wild card. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is an MVP candidate, but just haven't been able to put it together in the first couple of weeks. So what is your concern level with this Vikings squad?
Week 1, I think, is a much more tragic loss than this one. The Buccaneers lost me way more on edge. I didn't expect them to win this game, and I didn't expect them to make it close in the end. At the half, I thought I was right on my perspective, but then they ended up making it way closer than I expected by the end of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I'm ready to just throw away the Vikings. They've had some early season woes. This game was getting a lot of national attention, and Kirk Cousins isn't good at that. But I'm not ready to throw them away, but I'm not buying. I'm not selling. I'm going to hold on this team.
I mean, it's just interesting when you look at where this roster is at right now. I mean, questions on your running back, if Alexander Madison's really going to be the best option now that Dalvin Cook is gone. Kind of a refurbished secondary. Obviously, Kirk Cousins was kind of a sleeper MVP candidate, and Justin Jefferson's probably wide receiver 1 in the NFL right now. It just seems like there's such a wide variety of quality across the roster right now, and you wonder in situations like that if stars start to look around a little bit and say, maybe I'm not where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, I can see that. I also think that there's the potential of giving it more time. For instance, with Alexander Madison, we don't know who he is yet. I think that if there's a potential for greatness there, then waiting to see what it is also a possibility. However, if this season goes off the rails, if we get to the halfway point and they're more than a couple wins under 500, I can see that. Trade deadline coming, and it just went off the rails in Minnesota. They can't take advantage of what is a pretty weak division right now. I could see stars looking other ways.
Speaking of off the rails, I want you to start talking about this Bengals game, and I'll kind of interject my thoughts at the end. But yeah, go ahead. You start this one off.
My first thought watching this game was Joe Burrow. He's the highest paid quarterback in the league now. And while it wasn't as abysmal as week 1, he still didn't look like Joe Burrow. And I think that based off the results of this game and how no one offensively, specifically, you can't pick out a player who really just balled out and took the game by the throat. If Joe Burrow looked like himself, I think the Bengals win this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the same. Like, every single time we play the Ravens, Mark Andrews is just wide open. And it doesn't, it's not just the Ravens thing. It's just the Bengals, for some reason, can never handle any tight end who has any type of athleticism and isn't just a blocker. We see it every single time.
Yeah, defensively, they got really out-physical, which is weird. That's usually a thing that I look at in college ball and think, oh, Michigan beat Rutgers by out-physicaling them. That makes sense. But in the NFL, that's not a thing that happens week in and week out, where we see a team lose because they get out-physicaled by the other team's offense. And the Ravens did that to the Bengals. That's the reason the Bengals didn't have a better performance overall, was Joe Burrow didn't show up, and the Ravens just mowed over the defense of the Bengals.
And I'll get to the offense in a minute. But just going back to the defense for a second, it felt like every single time that the Bengals had the Ravens against the ropes, something dumb happened. Mark Andrews was wide open in the middle of the field, 3 yards behind the first down stick. Or we finally think we have a hold on Lamar Jackson, and he goes up the entire offensive line, cuts back, and scrambles for the 3 yards that they need for the first down. And it just seemed like any pressure that we got was just relieved so easily by the Ravens. And I don't know. I think the Ravens are kind of a deep offensive team right now, even with losing J.K. Dobbins for the season, which obviously very unfortunate because he's had injury issues his entire short career. But Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., and Zay Flowers had a huge day in the second half too. It just seems like they had so many guys just be able to make impact, and even Nelson Aguilar. Who knew that Nelson Aguilar was on the Ravens before this game?
Yeah, totally. The Ravens have seemed like a very slippery team this game because the very moment the Bengals would seem like they have a grasp on what they're doing, they would throw another weapon out there. And what's really wild is that the Ravens, I thought going into the season that their biggest problem was they didn't have enough weapons. I knew they had J.K. Dobbins. If he could stay healthy, he's always good. I knew they had Lamar, and they had potentially a good receiver in Rashad Bateman. And then I looked at there, and Mark Andrews, of course. But, a lot of teams have 4 good players on their offense. I didn't think they had the depth they had, but they really displayed it against the Bengals.
So I bring this up to say I look at this Ravens offense, and I can't believe that we were outplayed by a Ravens offense with those names, and we couldn't put anything together with Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd. And obviously, like you said multiple times, Joe didn't look like himself, and I still don't think he's healthy, and obviously re-aggravated that calf injury, kind of limping off the field towards the end of the game. So we'll see how effective the Theragun is between now and the time that we play the Rams on Monday night. But I don't know. I think this ship is sinking quickly because if Joe's not healthy for Monday night against the Rams and we dropped 0-3, like how deep does this hole get before we just shut him down?
Do you think it's a coaching issue?
I don't know. I'm as a biased Bengals fan, I've never really been a fan of Zach Taylor's play calling, especially in third down situations. I feel like so much of it is just kind of conservative in times that we should be a little more aggressive. But nothing about the Bengals offense so far has made me believe that we'd have the capability to go for it more or get more dynamic play calling because we haven't been able to just even hit the basic routes that Joe Burrow's made a name in the NFL for being able to be perfect.
Do you think it's time to sell on the team or should we hold longer?
I mean, I probably spent thousands of dollars on just Bengals merch in my entire life, so I can't really just sell on the team, right? So I'm not the person to ask, but I think this is going to be a very interesting 2 weeks for the Bengals because, as I said earlier, you have the LA Rams on Monday night, and Monday night games are always weird, and we don't really know what to expect from this LA Rams team yet, if they're going to be a similar situation where they have to blow it up. And then a Titans team that maybe you could have a get-right game against. But, looking down the line, by the end of October, they have a stretch where the Bengals play the Niners, the Bills, and the Texans, but then the Ravens, Steelers, and Jaguars. You can't go into that stretch in week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By week 6, you cannot go into that 1-5 or 2-4. You have to be at least 500. Because if you go into that stretch, there might be a time Joe Burrow might be done before Christmas.
Yeah.
And I just don't know, especially after paying all that money and having the wide receiver contracts on the horizon, if you can afford to just have a tank and shutdown year, because the championship window is so small. And I feel like back a couple years ago when the Bengals did make the Super Bowl, everyone said, oh, they're early, but how many teams have we said, oh, this is a young team. They're in the Super Bowl before we thought, and then they never go back again.
Yeah, a lot of times when that happens, it's a money issue, and as you hinted at towards earlier, the Bengals are kind of falling into that now. Because whenever it's a young team, that means it's also an unpaid team.
Yes.
So we end up losing a lot of the weapons that made it a young team to money issues, and they never make it back. And I could see the Bengals falling into this predicament. I didn't see it as much as it was there prior to the season, but throughout this sports talking process with you, I've realized how much of an issue coming ahead it could be. This is a season that just can't fall apart the way it has so far, but it is early. So there, like you were mentioning, Titans is a potential rebound game, and that's something that will need to happen. But this is not exactly the start we were looking for.
Yeah. All right, we're done with the Bengals rant for the week.
The Giants that were down 28-7 to the Cardinals, and it looked like the Giants may find themselves in the basement of the NFL, being the lolcow of the week. But the they found a way. The fourth quarter, it was all Giants. They played a perfect quarter, and they ended up winning that thing 31-28.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminded me of the Vikings-Bills game from last year with that, massive comeback. But, the NFC East, I think, is a division of teams that have such big and emotional fan bases that they get criticized all the time, and expectations are always Super Bowl or bust. But looking around, I mean, you got the Eagles, you got the Giants, you got the Cowboys, who have been. I mean, the Cowboys' defense is one of the best offenses in the league right now. I mean, what are you thinking about this NFC East so far?
Well, the Eagles have one of the best rosters in the league. Physically, I think that there's not a team that's better on the lines. Defensive line, offensive line, they are essentially perfect in the trenches. The Cowboys, their defense, as you were referring to, is not only really stout, but also explosive. I'm really interested to see how long it takes before we see a team bust the Cowboys' defense, because we haven't really seen anyone come close to it yet. And then the Commanders, I don't have any faith in, not going to lie. They don't look very good. So then that leaves the Giants, and I don't know that team. I don't know what to expect from them. They could go 12-5, and I wouldn't be stunned, and they could go 5-12, and I wouldn't be stunned.
Yeah.
And after week 1 looked as awful as it was, I was curious on if it was the Cowboys or the Giants being on the far from neutral. But going into this game, third quarter, they're down by 21 to a Cardinals team that is supposed to be the worst in the league. And I thought that it was just the Giants are terrible. Something happened. It's bad. But they can do it. We saw them make some magic last year, and it may not all be gone.
Yeah. Obviously, like you said, I mean, the Cardinals, let's be real, they suck, right? Like, they're not a good football team. But I think the Giants, if you're a Giants fan, you kind of take a deep breath at this game and you're on the next, like, okay, maybe we're not on the decline like we thought we might be.
Because if this game ends any other way than how it ended up doing after the third quarter, then the Giants are in complete panic mode. We'd see all the big sports networks just going off the rails about how they made the playoffs last year and now they're going to fall into this big, deep depression. And because if you get blown out by the Cardinals, that's terrible. And if you end up losing a thriller to the Cardinals, that's even more heartbreaking for the fan base.
Yeah.
But it turning out this way is the only way it could have turned out, where we have a little hope going a little ahead.
Speaking of heartbreak for the fan base, goodness gracious, what a game last night.
Yeah, the Browns lost the thriller to the Steelers 26-22 last night, and it's really, it's a wild game when a team's defense outscores their offense and they manage to win off of it after one of the most ridiculous pick sixes I've ever seen on the Alex Highsmith touchdown and T.J. Watt getting the game-winning touchdown on a fumble return. The Steelers put up a defensive clinic on Monday night.
Even if the Browns found a way to score another touchdown and win this game, they still lost last night.
Oh, yeah.
With the injury to Nick Chubb, I forget the full extent of all the diagnosed injuries he's had, but I believe it was an ACL, MCL, then just obviously a broken knee on a pretty gruesome tackle last night. I've seen pretty extreme reactions from Browns fans saying that the season's over, and obviously when you have a guy in a skill position like that, and then to take an injury like this, question if he'll ever be the same again. And we've talked multiple times on this podcast of how Nick Chubb is one of the best players at playing his position in the NFL. So how does this change your expectations of the Browns team right now?
Well, I don't have any faith in the passing game. Even week 1 when we talked about the Browns result, I was talking about how this is a team that's going to have to win with the run, as I don't see their passing attack being good, at least in the first half of the season. And now that they don't have their star running back, I guess the question ends up being raised, how much depth do they have there? Because it's next man up. And if the next man up ends up being pretty good for the next few weeks, then that gives the passing attack time to develop and a chance for the Browns to find a way to the playoffs still. But if next man up doesn't work, there's not an offensive element that does work, and you can't win like that in the NFL. It's officially less than a month until the MLB postseason. October is the favorite time of year for me as a big baseball fan, football fan, and I just love Halloween. It's my birthday month. All kinds of great things happening. But playoff baseball, there's nothing like it. We're so close to being there. And we still have a whole lot of things that are up in the air leading into that. The most major of those would be the AL East race. As we've seen the Orioles and Rays go back and forth all year for the number one spot in the AL and in their division. The winner of that race gets a playoff bye, which, as we've seen in baseball recently, is really big, especially for teams that waste a lot of momentum going into the playoffs. The O's have been one of the hotter teams in the league lately. Strangely enough, they are a team that is stereotyped as not clutch, but they've been the best team at winning clutch games this year. And the Rays had the hottest start on any baseball team we may have ever seen. And since they've been pretty up and down, they've been a really streaky team. They're also a very injured team. So I would say the Orioles are the favorite going into who wins the division in the playoffs, but it could go either way, as the Orioles can't win every close game. We saw the Rays have the perfect opportunity to take the small lead the O's have on them in the series this weekend when they played each other. But after getting blown out in Game 1, the O's find a way to win that series. So they strengthened their defense of the lead. And going into this weekend, the Orioles will play the Astros, which is a very notable series because the Astros are also leading a division that is very much up in the air. They have a very slight lead in the race, and the Mariners and Rangers are tied for second just behind them. It could go to anybody. And with the Mariners making that huge comeback from over 10 games down to at one point gain the division lead, and the Rangers coming from their fall from grace, and they've had a really rough patch lately, it could go to anybody. The Rangers have found their footing again, the Mariners have came back to earth, and the Astros are just as consistent as they've always been. They had a really rough week this week, but I don't think that they'll be losing to the A's and Royals every week.
I was going to ask, so, obviously this time of year is when, playoff baseball picks up. You get more of that national audience in.
Mm-hmm.
But for someone who maybe has a team, but their playoff race is kind of, wrapped up and, don't really have a chance at the playoffs, what are some of the games that they should be watching, going into this week and this weekend? Mm-hmm. to get prepped for the playoffs and kind of get that exciting baseball back?
Well, Orioles-Astros is the headline matchup this week. It's such a good series between two teams that, A, don't really like each other, B, there's a very much an underdog mentality in the Orioles anytime they play the Astros, because the Astros have been so good, and this is the first time we've seen the Orioles be good recently. And they both are trying to defend very close races to get buys. It's a very important series. It's like the headline matchup. I think any series with the Blue Jays right now is a much-watched series, considering how they've been, inconsistent, but at their peak, they're one of the best teams in baseball. They're trying to find their way into the wild card, and they're playing a Rays team that is both a rival and is also in that Orioles-Rays race for the bye. So Blue Jays-Rays is huge this weekend. And then also, any Rangers game right now is really big. If you really just Texas in general, but the Rangers are playing a Red Sox team. They're trying to sneak their way into that last wild card team. And the Rangers have been ever so steadily refinding their footing after what was a epic collapse earlier in September. So I'd say the three series you'd look at this week are Orioles, Astros, Blue Jays, Rays, and Red Sox, Rangers.
Next week we'll be back with episode 5 of the Back Page. Hopefully it won't include another Bengals rant, but who knows. I'm Carter Sims.
I'm Colin Crisp.
And you can listen to our podcast on Spotify and YouTube.